Time now for this morning's intelligence briefing. And we got a guy who knows whereof he speaks to talk about these things. He's former CIA analyst Fred Fleitz, and he Skypes in from Washington, D.C. Fred, you've seen the video. You see that top commander of al-Qaida in the Arabian Peninsula. In addition to it looked like he had colored his beard. I don't know if there's a significance. Did you notice that it was one of the absurdities of the video presentation there, but his language was just as toxic as the terror attack, claiming this attack was in vengeance for the Prophet Muhammad. What about the growth of al-Qaida in the Arabian Peninsula, Fred?
JD, it's great to be here. This is a more complicated story than what the news media and some pundits are saying. Now, you remember last week, there were pundits saying this represented a jihadi Olympics where al-Qaida and the Islamic State were competing against each other to gain the international spotlight. Now we have AQAP, the al-Qaida in the Arabian Peninsula, claiming responsibility. But we also know that the attackers went to Syria, and one of them said that they staged the attack on behalf of the Islamic State. So how can both of them be true? This is what I think is going on. There is collaboration between these groups. AQAP is claiming responsibility because it wants to get funding from Gulf sponsors who fund terrorism. But I think these groups are cooperating against common enemies, against the West. And we know there was an agreement in November where al-Qaida and the Islamic State agreed to stop fighting each other in Syria to attack common targets. And I think that's still going on.
It seems like we keep hearing about more and more groups. You know, several years ago, it was just the Taliban, then al-Qaida, now ISIS. How do we stop these groups from growing in numbers?
Well, AQAP has been around for a while, but it's been eclipsed by the Islamic State. I think that's a good question because there are other al-Qaida franchises. What's happened since 9/11, because it's difficult to launch spectacular terrorist attacks, al-Qaida has become a decentralized organization with franchises in North Africa, in the Middle East. They had a franchise in Iraq, which split off the Islamic State. And it's harder to track these groups right now because they are decentralized and they're acting on their own. We just need more intelligence to go after them. And we basically have to have an understanding that there's not one central leadership that's approving everything that these groups do.
And speaking of intelligence, Fred, there have been reports in the wake of the Paris attacks. Obviously, we had the brothers on the no-fly list here, but there were reports in France that French officials actually stopped surveillance on those who were involved in the terror attacks. I don't know if it was 6 months ago or exactly when, but they stopped surveillance. Have you heard about that? Is there anything to that report?
I did hear that, and I think that report is accurate. The problem is there are so many targets in France. There are so many potential radicalized individuals that French security can't follow all of them. I mean, someone can say radical things, but not necessarily ever plan to turn to terrorism, and that's a difficult call for an intelligence agency to make. The French security services have to look at what happened here, who dropped the ball, and what indications were there that they should have caught that surveillance of these guys should not have been ended.
Fred, 30 seconds remaining. How difficult is it to fight these groups if really what they're looking after is to become martyrs? So how do you fight that?
Well, we have to have intensified surveillance of these groups. We have to have surveillance of mosques. We have to have security services going into mosques. We have to have surveillance of social media and email. And we have to go after moderate groups and tell them that we really need moderate Muslim leaders and groups to help us identify these individuals and stop them from turning to radical jihadism.
Fred, we're so pleased that you are going to stay with us through the break as we continue to talk about this important subject. And inevitably and understandably, we turn our focus to America and our own intelligence gathering apparatus, because after all, the name of this program is America's Forum. Now, don't you go away, because again, we have more with former CIA analyst Fred Fleitz about our intelligence assessments, about what may be planned for our shores here on America's Forum. Please stay with us on Newsmax TV. For more on intelligence and sharing intelligence, he'll share his considerable intelligence with us. Fred Fleitz, the former CIA analyst, Five Eyes Do we have enough eyes to really have a complete picture of intelligence in the proper way it should be shared?
I think so. Let me tell you, Five Eyes is a security classification. It represents a special collaboration among these 5 nations, and if it's something says Five Eyes, only nationals of those 5 countries can read this information. And it's been a pretty good collaboration on intelligence sharing. We have a very good relationship with all of them. At the National Security Agency, there are actually nationals from these countries working there to gather information against common security threats.
Fred, we'd heard reports several weeks ago that actually, not several weeks ago, but a few days ago, that France actually was keeping a close eye on those brothers that were involved in one of those Parisian terrorist attacks, and that suddenly they had stopped weeks prior to the attack. So there is some concern there that they may have dropped the ball. What would be your response?
Well, they may have dropped the ball, but as I said in the last segment, there are a lot of targets in France, and the French have to make decisions, given their limited manpower, who do they follow? I mean, there are thousands of Muslims living in France, and there are thousands of individuals who are potential radicalized Islamists. And I think there are indications here that the French missed that means that they should have kept following these guys.
Fred, we saw the video from al-Qaida on the Arabian Peninsula today. We made mention of that. Of course, a few weeks ago, there was the release of the new issue of the al-Qaida magazine that's entitled Inspire, which had the article describing, quote, how to make a bomb in the kitchen of your mom. With that kind of slick presentation through the magazines, and there is the graphic again, is there related chatter the intelligence community is picking up based on this article or as a result of this Inspire, I hate to call it initiative, but that's what it seems to be?
The intelligence community is very concerned about these magazines. In the most recent edition of Inspire, there are plans for a bomb which they claim cannot be detected by airport security. The good thing is this bomb is extremely difficult to make, and I know this because I spoke to a chemist, and I asked him to look at this, and he said, you know, this isn't something you're going to be able to make in your home. But it's disturbing that plans on how to make explosives and weapons are available to individuals on the internet. This is how al-Qaida is trying to send homegrown terrorists behind our borders to carry out acts of terrorism and to evade transportation security.
So again, just to put some minds at ease, that headline about how to make a bomb in the kitchen of your mom, when it comes to these undetectable bombs, that's just that's a headline with no basis in reality.
Well, the bomb in the kitchen of your mom is a detectable bomb that's fairly easy to make. The undetectable bomb, in a more recent edition of the magazine, it's very difficult to make, which I'm happy to say.
Fair enough. We appreciate the clarification. Former CIA analyst Fred Fleitz, as always, your insights and the intelligence briefing you give us is greatly appreciated. More to come here on America's Forum. Stay with us.